The term tissue memory is nowadays very common in the therapy and movement world. And often you hear statements like emotions are stored in the fascia. But is this really possible? Now there is actually an interesting phenomenon which is quite well documented. During manual therapy, some people suddenly remember long forgotten events, sometimes even together with clear images, sounds or smells. And of course, you can then get the impression that the tissue itself had stored the event. But before we jump to such a conclusion, it helps to look at a classic scientific principle called Occam's razor. It is often put into the slogan, if you hear hoofbeats, think of horses, not of zebras. Or to describe it another way, if there is a simple explanation, go for that explanation rather than an explanation that needs additional assumptions. Modern memory research gives us here a pretty solid answer for our described example, because memories are strongly context dependent and state dependent. That means certain stimuli can work almost like a key. For example, you smell a specific tea and suddenly you are back with your grandparents. Or you look at an old photograph and forgotten details begin to reappear. But importantly, the memory is not stored in the molecules of the tea in front of you and also not in the photograph, but they are simply activated through your memory system. And this may be exactly how we can understand the phenomenon of the so-called tissue memory. Touch, pressure, or tension in the tissue provide specific sensory signals. And these signals may act as a trigger, as a key, allowing your brain to access stored experiences. This principle is actually very well researched. For example, in the classic study by Eich in 1980 on state-dependent memory. There it was shown that memories are more easily retrieved when the physical or emotional states resembles the original experience. And honestly, this fits surprisingly well with what many of us observe in clinical practice. At the same time, it is also clear the tissue often carries traces of specific past experiences. For example, scars after surgery, changes in tissue tension after injury, or long-term tissue adaptations related to chronic stress. These traces are real and they are therapeutically very relevant. But a trace is not the same thing as a memory. A trace is a change in the tissue. A memory is the interpretation of an experience. And this interpretation most likely happens in the central nervous system. If we mix these two things together, it can quickly sound as if the tissue itself would sometimes think or feel. A more precise way would be to say the tissue provides cues and the brain creates meaning from them. Of course, and let me become a little bit speculative, a well-trained neurologist would not be able to completely rule out the possibility that future scientific advances may discover an additional nervous system superior to our well-known nervous system that we know at this time, an information processing system that may possibly work at lightning speed and may include fascia. That would be very exciting and very spectacular. And that is definitely not out of this world that science may move into that direction. But if we go back to the horses and the zebra, then there is a much more likely and plausible explanation at the moment, and this is this, that the emotions stored in the tissue may be a similar phenomenon than you smelling the childhood tea and remembering old experiences from your childhood. Less mystical perhaps, but actually very well supported by science.